Richard, thank you for joining us today. As I say, as we said in other episodes, this is kind of about the guests, not about me. And we're going to kind of talk a little bit about kind of your journey and what it means to be a chief risk officer in wealth management. And in keeping with previous episodes, I'm going to tell you the title of the episode, kind of at some point, so we can see if we can capture your reaction to that. So why don't you start by introducing yourself and maybe mention how we met and maybe share a funny story.
Yeah. So Richard Piercy, I was at ICAP with you. My first acquisition, or part of an M&A acquisition with ICAP going into Tullett Prebon. I spent 15 years in the Army before I came into financial services, and now a group head of risk at Evelyn Partners, but I was a CRO before we disposed of the fund solutions business. Excellent.
So what is it? So what does it mean to be head of risk, CRO? To be that kind of the senior person for a second line risk department in a wealth manager.
It's important. I feel responsibility because I want to imagine myself in the seat of the client. Am I comfortable that controls are effective, that our processes are correct? Are we seeing the right outcomes? And I think consumer duty is a really important piece of change we've seen from the regulator, because it's placed our mindset in the eyes of the client. Are we seeing the right outcomes? And I think that's what a risk manager or a risk professional is looking to do: achieve the right outcomes, both for the firm but for the clients we serve.
Excellent. And so it's interesting that we went straight into kind of consumer duty, which is obviously a piece of regulation. It's a rather large piece of regulation. One of your former colleagues, in a previous episode, we asked the question: when did risk management become regulatory compliance? When did is a CRO's role now as much about, or even more about, regulatory compliance than anything else? How do you walk that path?
So two ways, because I've got a sense of humour. So I always tease my friend, the head of compliance, who we both report into the group CRO, that compliance is a subset of risk, and it is. It's one of the key fundamentals. So regulatory risk sits as part of your overarching risk framework, and you need to comply to it, because otherwise you're going to get yourself in trouble. Nobody wants that, but it plays into that key area of what are you trying to achieve. There's technology risk, there's fraud, there's financial crime. All of that is defined by the regulator now. So it sits and it's fundamental to our existence, and it drives a lot of our activity and behaviour.
How do you navigate the absence of very specific rules?
Culture. You look at your culture of the firm. Can you rely on the people you're working with to make the right decision on a difficult day? And that's a moral element. And obviously, being from the army, that was the culture that was trained into me, and it's a culture I try to live by. I'll often fail, according to my wife, but yeah, I will look to ensure that culture pervades the organisation, because bad apples lead to good apples rotting, and you've got to be careful of how you deal with that. But also, people want to work for a place that's doing the right thing, and that's key, and it's part of why I come to work, because I think I'm doing the right thing.
How do you make the frameworks and ideas that you need to embed in your organisation resonate with your people? It's a euphemism for people who are not in second line functions, first line functions, or revenue. People who are more focused on revenue than perhaps second line controls.
So first of all, to use the jargon phrase, and keep it simple, stupid. Let's explain, but also let's explain why. Why am I a risk manager, and why am I trying to reduce our exposure to risk? Well, there's two reasons why. Because reporting a risk event is painful. I accept that, and so do most of the front office. So that's painful for them. They want to avoid that. But also it leads to poor client outcomes, the firm losing money, therefore it's an EBITDA downside. And it's just inefficient. So I very much look at risk events as an opportunity to think about lessons learnt, root causes, and therefore process improvements. I really like that idea of a feedback loop on risk events, which sees us try to prevent it from happening again. Now, in a highly manual process, you're always going to get the human element, and humans are fallible. We all make mistakes. So that's a key element of looking at that. But where we can automate, let's do it. Let's make things more efficient.
I mean, do you think automation do people look to automation as sort of a panacea? I mean, when you're going through your your threat assessment, because obviously you're not just a risk manager, you're a threat hunter. I can't take the credit for that. But so how do you kind of approach that using language that resonates with the business?
You've got to think about it as a sort of scalable, and if I think about a current example, AI will solve this, AI will do that. No, it won't. There are lots of things that AI is not going to be able to do in the next 5 years for firms who have a finite amount of resource to throw at these things. So yes, it will help with some things, it will make things better, but actually there are some things where it will have limitations. So again, you come back to that, what's the story and what's the journey you're trying to take people on? I'm very much take people with me on the journey. Hopefully people that have worked with me would recognise that. And I want to inspire people to think about risk in a way of how can I make this better for us all.
Yeah. And this idea, sometimes people talk about risk people or compliance people, and every so often someone will say to me, well, I'm not really a risk person. Is there such a thing as a risk person? I mean, who are these risk people?
We're all risk people. If you've crossed the road today, you're a risk manager. And we actually use that in our training. I'm teaching my kids how to cross the road safely. Stop, look, and listen.
Well, have you learned that yet?
Well, again, it's risk appetite.
Yeah.
So we start to talk about the framework, and and my kids fall asleep really easily nowadays because I talk to them this way. But actually, you've got a risk appetite. There's something over there. The house is burning down. I'm getting across the road no matter what as quickly as possible. My appetite's gone up. But actually, I've got no rush to get home. I'm crossing the road. I'll do it safely at a pedestrian crossing. Thank you very much. 100% cast iron. So there is that balance of and then you've got external factors. The lorry, the driver who's texting. So you've got those problems. But ultimately, if you can talk to people in a way that they understand, they'll understand that they're a risk manager. They're in the first line.
Yeah.
They may not be able to tell you exactly what we as a firm define as the first line, but they can understand I own risk because I am executing in the market.
Yeah, and I think that is very important. I mean, I know kind of many years ago when I was at Barclays, there was a very senior person at Barclays used to refer to risk managers. He wasn't talking about me, or the risk team. He was talking about the traders sitting in the front office who are actively kind of bringing the risk to the table. So, right, I'm going to tell you the title of this, what we're going to call this episode. But before I do that, I'm going to ask you. So, what do you think CRO stands for?
Well, clearly, Chief Risk Officer. But what in a role does it stand for?
Yeah.
I'd say as an effective Chief Risk Officer is the conscience of the exec. He's the guy or girl that should be able to turn around and say, "Are you sure?" And everyone will turn around to him and say, "That's a good point.
Yeah.
Let's explain this." And I don't think I've heard it over so many years. Risk and compliance say no, and I'm like, guys, we don't say no. We say you can, but you need to think about the following things first. Or are you sure?
So it's how, right? So this is how you might be able to do this safely. And I found, I've been a CRO myself, and I found myself saying that quite a lot, and so we thought, I remembered an ex-colleague of mine saying, "Simon, you're the Chief Repetition Officer." right? And so that's what we're going to call the episode. Yeah? Chief Repetition Officer. What is their role? Who knows? Who knows if that's going to resonate with people or not? But I think the reason kind of that story came to mind is because I think as a CRO, do you find yourself over the years saying the same things over and over again? Because in my experience, I kind of think nothing new under the sun, really. Do people really learn from history? I mean, how long does that institutional or industry sector memory actually last?
In my experience, as long as the people have been there. I've seen this before. I've definitely seen this risk event before, or we went through this a few years ago. KRIs at entity level versus group level. We prefer to see it, and I can jokingly say in emails now, we're revisiting the entity versus group level conversation, and you see it because people's view on risk and how they want to define risk and how they want to break it down, and their appetite for granularity versus aggregation changes, especially when they see a specific problem in a certain area.
Okay, so your role and the CRO's role at board level, at board level, what is the kind of a bit more detail around kind of what the CRO and senior risk professionals are there to do?
At board level, it's to effectively aggregate the risk you're seeing at the granular level. So we collect a single KRI on a subject. We slot that into a series of principal risks. About 250 KRIs across the entire business.
I mean, okay, so that sounds like an enormous amount of information.
Yeah, it can be. And they're not always right. There's an element of that's your quantitative, then you've got to put a qualitative lens over the top of that. And that's your first line view, and then you're applying a second line opinion over the top of that. So the layered effect and the ability to build, and as I said, that granularity to aggregation is, I think, what the risk team is trying to do on top of manage the framework, because you're an independent voice in the organisation trying to build that picture so that people understand what risk means.
And say, I kind of know. Obviously, this will be going out publicly, so we kind of need to be kind of careful how you approach the answer, and even I need to be careful about how I approach the question. But as this is raw and uncut, I'm just going to blurt it out. Right, 250 KRIs. Yep. That feels like an almost unmanageable amount of information. I mean, that feels quite scary.
Yeah, it can be. We have tier 1s and tier 2s. So tier 1s are your top 50 KRI, your killer KRIs. I've heard another CRO refer to them as. And then the others are to give you that sort of, that heart rate monitor, pulse of the organisation. Are we seeing? And what I'm really keen to do is have my team look at trend analysis. But we automate. It's a SharePoint site, but yeah. I'm pretentious, so I call it a KRI engine. We've got MI that comes off the back of that. It works. We're embedding that into a new GRC platform. So I'm trying to build a data-driven organisation and sort of mirror what the FCA has said. They want to be a data-driven organisation. Yeah. We've seen Section 165 be sent out every year. And I'm trying to do the same thing, because I think what you'll always get, if people don't believe your data, you will get the board and exec question the data rather than what it means. They'll go, well, is number 5 right for number of material risk events? Well, yes. Rather than, why are we having 5 material risk events a month? And that's the sort of conversation I want to lead people into, rather than I don't trust the data.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that's a made-up number, but actually, you're right. Sometimes the conversation, you've got to move the conversation very quickly away from, is this data accurate? The only way you can do that is about proving that it is. Yeah. And then you've got to move immediately into, look, the data's accurate. This is what it's telling us. These are the actions that we've got to take. And so kind of, but then of course, it's about, you can't possibly, so the risk and compliance team can't possibly solve all the problems in an organisation. And so how
we're
do
not,
you?
We're not there to
Yeah.
either. We're there to challenge the business and to help them understand. And what you're just saying is sort of leads me into one of my key interview questions for my junior members of staff when I interview them is, what's the most important word in your job title? And I'm appointing a risk analyst. And the ones that say risk generally are wrong. Because analysis...
Oh, they might still get hired.
They might still get hired because it's a learning point, and especially if they're new grads. But it's the analysis I want, because I want the data to be good. That's the risk. It's the analysis. It's the ability to turn that data into something meaningful that actually tells a story to the exec or the board or a specific SMF, so that we can actually help work with them to say, your controls and processes need to improve in this area. Here's the analysis of that.
How do you get that almost unfiltered message up to the audit and risk committee, the risk committee, the board, the senior individuals that are empowered to make the decisions? How are you going to get that unfiltered message up there so that they actually see these are the actions that we've got to take and this is why? Or still see that they've got these potential issues, but then consciously decide to say, do you know what? They are not a priority right now. We can accept those. We can accept those things because these things are more important.
So one of the great things I heard from my time in the army was out in operations, and a good set of rehearsals saves a poor set of orders. And I apply that to a board or exec. I don't go in there and I'm not looking to drop the hammer on anyone. So I've had a conversation with the COO or the head of investment management, and we've talked about some of these things so that they know I'm going to raise a point and they've had an opportunity to think about it, because I will be challenging them as well as informing the CEO of what we're thinking, so that they can say, and we've talked about this and we're going to do the following things, because ultimately I don't own the levers to change what's going on in the first line. I can identify problems and help identify problems, and hopefully my framework does that, but ultimately they're the ones that need to react and respond to that information. So it's collaborative. Not out here to make enemies. It'd be foolish of me to do that. Wouldn't last very long. So it's and that's part of that repetition. Can I go to him? Can I rely on him to provide me with a sensible answer?
So there's that word, repetition.
Yeah.
Right. So actually, you've used it in the most positive way.
Yeah. I want to build a relationship with them.
Another R word.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's reputation.
There we go. The three R's.
Said,
repetition, relationship, reputation.
Yeah. And as soon as you said chief repetition officer, I thought to myself, and also reputation officer, because does the classic you go into the fridge and something's been in there a week, does it pass a sniff test? Well, you ask yourself that all the time in work. Does this feel right? And if it doesn't feel right, let's dig a little bit more. And I do enjoy those little runs around the business trying to find out more information about a subject. And that's like, right, this doesn't pass the sniff test. What do we need to do about it? Where is it breaking down? I find that fun. I'm maybe a bit sad. And I try and encourage my team to do that. Risk managers can sit at their desk looking at risk all day. But actually, if you don't have a network across the organisation, and you saw me at my time at ICAP, I was actively avoiding my desk. But going to meet people and chatting to people and finding out what's going on, what are their concerns, because anecdotes are generally based in some sort of issue or problem they're seeing when they're talking about risk.
And actually, quite often, someone will approach you and say, well, hypothetically speaking.
Yeah, which is the classic online phrase of asking for a friend.
Yeah, that's quite funny. Have you balanced this kind of role of providing the independent challenge with something that's very important, enabling business?
So I see them as going hand in glove, because when I'm challenging the business and asking questions, I'm not doing it just to make myself look good and clever, because there are a lot more clever people out there than me. But it's about trying to find efficiencies and how do we make this business better? Because if we're spending a lot of time talking about risk management, risk events, how things have gone wrong, we're actually losing opportunities to think about commercial opportunities. So you almost think about it like that. Is if I can make something more efficient, we will get time back. That's business development time. That's growing your book. That's looking at your portfolios. That's engaging with clients. So efficiency breeds opportunity.
Yeah, efficiency breeds opportunity. I like that. And when we spoke to one of our COO guests, I mean, they were very much about kind of operational efficiency and looking at risk management through that lens.
I did like the title of that podcast. Operations should be boring. Or operations is boring.
Oh yeah, operations is boring. Of course, it's not.
No, but I
Right.
agreed.
Yeah.
Because actually, a stable, well-run operations function should be boring because you want all the processes to be well-defined and controls to be in place. You want it to run efficiently and effectively because it's the lifeblood of the organisation. It transfers execution to settlement. If I use a trading life cycle, so it should be. Now, it can be exciting in the sense that you're trying to build new processes and always embed them and improve things, but you want it to be stable.
Yeah.
And you ask anybody in the front office, anybody in settlements, they just want operations to be boring. I'm not doing I spent 2 years in operations and I have a very healthy respect for them, but I get it. I get why you'd want that.
Yeah, maybe we kind of need to. Maybe we'll bring Sophie back, and you and her can go toe to toe about whether it is boring or should be boring or.
It should be, but it isn't,
Yeah.
and it isn't for many of the reasons that you want to make it boring.
Yeah, but I get the point. I do get the point. If you've got an efficient operation, then actually you can focus on efficiencies and focus on building that business value. I think when there's that, I guess there's that sweet spot of excitement. Yeah. So you need to have you need to strike a balance between kind of innovation, where, do you know what, we're going a bit fast, but we've got enough control in place to continue making money, continue to innovate, because we've got that headspace, because all that stuff over there, it's locked down, it's working, and it's working well.
Yeah, it's Ellen's comment about why do we have brakes on a car? So that you can drive quicker. Actually, why do we wear seatbelts? So if it goes wrong, we've got a safety net.
Yeah. So yes, and I mean, I'm old enough to remember not having seatbelts. But it's just now a habit. Actually, that's actually let's spend 2 minutes on this, right? So things that are habit forming, right? So I remember my parents, really, really complaining about having to wear a seatbelt, and I remember having to be reminded to put a seatbelt on. Whereas I think most people below the age of 45 probably just seatbelt on.
I remember the campaign, belt your kids in the back.
Yeah. Anyway, right. So let's not go down that rabbit hole. Let's talk now about information. So we talked a little bit about your 250 KRIs. We didn't go into detail. We don't need to. But I guess the question I've got is, sometimes boards are criticised for being backward looking, and sometimes they are backward looking because the management information that's put in front of them is backward looking, by not just the risk department, but by all departments. So what would you do, and kind of what are you doing, or what would you like to do, or what do you think should be done to kind of move the dial a little bit and have that MI a bit more forward-looking, other than revenue projections, because obviously that's everything. Everyone's talking about revenue projections. That's probably the most overused forward-looking metrics in any board pack.
So I think what you're looking to do is tell the story with the risk information you've got, but you're taking to the board not just here's what's happened, here's why we think it's either a good thing or a bad thing, and what are we going to do about it. And that the board want to hear the exec are in control of their business. So I see a problem, or we have this problem. It's a good thing. So therefore, we're going to jump into it. And risk appetite works on both ways. You can take more risk if you're inside of your appetite and you stretch those boundaries, or actually we found a problem. Here's what we're going to do to fix it. And the board get confidence and comfort from their exec if they're seeing and hearing that, rather than we found a problem. My daughters ask me, to tell me I'm hungry. Good. What do you want me to do about it? take me to the next step of this. Can I have? Of course you can. So let's build that journey and grow that confidence in your exec with the board.
Okay. And so how would you feel? Let's say we were doing a piece of work for you, and we suggested this concept. We're going to have dotted lines. So basically, what we're going to say to you is we're going to sit down with you and we're going to work with you to say, look, do you know what? This is where you are now, but if you continue along this path, either with or without investment, this is where your risk profile may go, and this is how much it might cost you to if it ends up there. Are those the sorts of things that perhaps you're kind of exploring in your governance forums, or through your ICRA process?
Yeah, you basically just stolen one of my analogies.
Oh, sorry.
It's absolutely. I say a captain will always steer his ship constantly once he's left port. What you don't want to do is set a straight line and think I'm going to head. I'm going from Liverpool to New York, and you find you're 500 miles north when you think you should be at New York. It's a waste of money, a waste of resource. You've got to change course. You should be constantly steering and checking you're right. So that here's where you're going to end up. There should be that feedback loop through your risk management system, but also through project management and program management to allow you to continue to change. Now you don't want to change for change's sake is a waste of resource as well. So make sure it's robust and you're confident and comfortable with it. But ultimately, keep on testing where you are.
Okay. So think about either your actual 250 KRIs, or if you could wave a magic wand, the ones that you'd have, and of that, what is now I'm imagining this really really long list. You got 5. So you've got 5 minutes and you've got 5 KRIs to focus on. Which 5 are you picking?
Good question. Really good question. I'd look at people first. Are our people happy? Are we looking at turnover? Because that's a bellwether to whether the organisation is a happy organisation or not. To budget, if we look at wealth management, have we got inflows and outflows? Because that tells you the client journey and the client experience. And I think we'd be looking at. You could go to your OpRes, important business services, and I'd aggregate and say, are all our important business services meeting their requirements? I think that's 5.
Well, if you
might
get
squeeze a 6 in there.
Yeah, I don't know. Have I lost count, or was that only 3? Am I giving you a pass?
Yeah,
you talked about people.
Yep.
Budget.
Yep.
And then we started talking about OpRes
And client
journey. Is that 4? I'm going to push you because I know you well enough. You get one more. What are you picking?
The get out of jail free cards as a risk manager is risk events. Isn't
There
it?
we go. Yeah. So real kind of open question. When you think about conduct and conduct risk, what do you think about?
So it's the doing the right thing on a dark day or a bad day. You can go to the regulatory angle, but ultimately, actually I did some fraud training this morning before I came over here. So and I was saying to a colleague, I'm generally too prudent, so I'm a little bit overcautious. But actually, it's understanding the regulation, but also understanding where you can jeopardise the firm or the business, and then whether you are the sort of person that will do that willingly. You can be negligent in your duties, and that can be an error. But actually, if you're doing it willingly, either for the betterment of your perceived betterment of yourself, or for another reason, then you're treading on the conduct line, and that's well, you're out the industry, aren't you?
What sort of changes have you seen with respect to kind of conduct and people's behaviour?
Expectations have gone up. So the expectation that people will behave, and so we worked at a firm where the Daily Mail headlines were about initiations. I never saw one, and that's a step change, and that's the sort of thing that people are more professional nowadays, and you get fewer chances to make your mark, in a positive way, and you only get one opportunity to make your mark in a poor way. And that's ultimately what conduct's coming down to nowadays.
And do you think that's happened naturally because of society? I mean, we don't spend too much time on kind of philosophy, but do you think that those changes have come about naturally because of society, or do you think those changes have come about because there are now some quite significant consequences for you if you get caught?
Both. I think society has definitely changed. People, it's a global, flippant thing to say, global world.
Yeah.
But people will move. People will move across continents for jobs nowadays.
Yeah.
So what we're seeing is there is always somebody who could take your role if you don't live up to expectations and standards. But also social media. You splashed across the front of the paper before you even know you've done something wrong.
Yeah.
And then there is the regulator saying, well, actually, to protect clients and firms, this specific behaviour is no longer acceptable.
Yeah. Probably, actually, a good place to end. So before we do myth or truth, just want to say thank you so much for coming in and speaking to us today, and hopefully be able to stay around for if we can put it together for just something really short on operational resilience. So Anna, do you want to come in and do myth or truth?
Oh, Lord. My Facebook and Instagram sites are locked down, so hopefully you follow me.
Oh yeah, I mean, don't worry about that. Yes, I'm quite good at walking the personal life, professional life line. So do we need to set you up with a mic?
Yes.
There we go.
Ideally, so we don't have the
There we go.
issues.
So what we'll do is Anna will ask a question, and then if you want some dramatic effect, you can look at your camera and go.
Okay. Innovation and compliance are inherently at odds.
Myth.
The more data we have, the less judgment we use.
Gonna have to push you.
Myth. Can I qualify that?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think you can be blinded by too much data. It's the quality of the data that is really important.
Independence matters more than influence.
Myth.
The more detailed the policy, the safer the firm.
Sorry, could you say that?
The more detailed the policy, the safer the firm.
Myth. The easier to read, the better you understand it.
You can automate compliance.
Myth.
And then the last one, governance stifles growth.
Definite myth.
Great. Thanks very much, Richard. See you again soon.
Thank you.
Cheers.